What makes a man truly dangerous? Is it the number of bodies left in his wake, or the silence he keeps while the world searches for answers? Some wore suits, others hid behind charm. Some smiled for the camera, while their victims were never seen again. These men didn't just break the law, they broke the human mind. They haunted neighborhoods, headlines, and entire generations. Their names are whispered in documentaries, remembered in screams, and etched into the pages of horror. But this isn't fiction. This is real. From twisted geniuses to cold-blooded killers, these are the faces of true darkness. Welcome to the countdown of the most dangerous men in history. And fair warning, once you know what they did, you'll never look at the world the same way again. Number 5, Ted Bundy, the charmer from hell. Number 5, Ted Bundy. If evil had a face, it wouldn't be twisted or grotesque. It would look like Ted Bundy, a clean-cut law student, a charming young man with a crooked smile, someone you trust to help you carry your groceries or fix a flat tire. And that's exactly how he hunted. Bundy weaponized trust. With a fake cast on his arm and a quiet voice, he would approach young women in parking lots and libraries, asking for help. Once they let their guard down, it was already too late. He didn't need to stalk them. He made them come to him. From 1974 to 1978, Ted Bundy unleashed terror across Washington, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. He left behind a trail of broken families, buried truths, and missing girls, most of them never found. Officially, he confessed to 30 murders, but investigators believe the number could be double, maybe more. Bundy had a chilling ability to blend in. He volunteered at suicide hotlines. He dated women. He smiled in court. There was no blood on his hands in public, only in the woods, the basements, and a remote forest where he dumped his victims like trash. He was a sadist who thrived on domination. He didn't just kill his victims. He degraded them, revisited their corpses, and relived his fantasies in brutal detail. What makes Bundy so terrifying isn't just his body count. It's how human. He looked while doing the inhuman. He didn't grow up in poverty. He didn't suffer brain trauma. There was no chemical imbalance or childhood abuse to blame. He was smart, calculating, and he knew exactly what he was. He once said, and I quote, "I'm the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet." And he proved it. After being arrested in Utah, Bundy escaped from jail not once, but twice. In his second escape, he fled across the country to Florida, where he committed some of the most gruesome murders of his spree. In the early morning hours of January 15, 1978, Bundy broke into Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. Within 15 minutes, he had beaten, strangled, and sexually assaulted 4 women, 2 of them fatally. He walked away, blood-soaked and calm. The carnage didn't stop there. He attacked again, just weeks later, abducting and killing 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. This time, he was caught. His trial became a national spectacle, the first ever to be fully televised. Bundy, ever the narcissist, chose to represent himself in court, cross-examining witnesses, flashing smiles to the camera, and turning his trial into a twisted performance. People, especially women, lined up to watch. Some even sent him love letters. The irony? He used his intelligence and charm to escape justice for years. And in the end, it was that same arrogance that helped seal his fate. He was sentenced to death 3 times over. But even in the final years of his life, Bundy played games. He offered confessions in pieces. He taunted investigators with vague details, holding back the names of some victims like trophies only he deserved to remember. On January 24th, 1989, the electric chair silenced him. Outside the prison, crowds gathered and cheered. Some held signs that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn." But his legacy didn't die. He left behind unanswered questions, missing girls, families with no closure, and a haunting blueprint for killers that came after. His story inspired books, documentaries, films, and a cultural obsession with the charming killer archetype. But let's be clear, Ted Bundy wasn't a genius. He wasn't misunderstood. He was a predator who used society's blind spots, kindness, appearance, and trust, as his greatest weapons. And he remains one of the most dangerous men in history, not because of what he looked like, Number 4, Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Monster. Number 4, Jeffrey Dahmer. Some monsters wear masks. Others live quietly next door. For over a decade, Jeffrey Dahmer carried out one of the most disturbing crime sprees in American history, all from the modest walls of his Milwaukee apartment. To his neighbors, he was polite, unremarkable, a young man who minded his business. But behind his apartment door was a chamber of horrors. What made Dahmer so terrifying wasn't just that he killed. It was how he killed and what he did after. His crimes weren't driven by rage or impulse. They were cold, methodical, and deeply disturbing. From 1978 to 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 young men and boys. His victims were often lured back to his apartment with promises of money or drinks. Once inside, they were drugged, strangled, and dismembered. But it didn't end there. Dahmer kept trophies: skulls, internal organs, photographs of bodies in various stages of decay. In his freezer, police would later find severed heads. In a barrel, acid used to dissolve human remains. In his closet, a shrine in progress, made of bones. But perhaps the most horrifying part of Dahmer's crimes was his attempt to turn people into zombies. He drilled holes into the skulls of some victims while they were still alive and injected them with acid or boiling water. Try and create obedient, mindless companions. It wasn't about violence. It was about control. Dahmer didn't want to kill. He wanted to own his victims, to make them stay, forever. And for years, he got away with it. Police had multiple chances to stop him. In one infamous case, 14-year-old Konarak Sintasunphone escaped Dahmer's apartment, naked and bleeding. Bystanders called the police. But when officers arrived, Dahmer calmly explained it was just a lover's spat. The police returned the boy to Dahmer. Minutes later, Konarak was murdered, and his skull kept as a souvenir. Dahmer's ability to manipulate authority in his victims shows just how dangerous he truly was. He didn't look threatening. He looked normal. And in a world where we're taught to trust appearances, Dahmer thrived in plain sight. It all unraveled on July 22, 1991. Tracy Edwards, a would-be victim, managed to escape Dahmer's apartment and flag down police. What they found inside would shock even the most seasoned officers. Photographs of dismembered bodies, bloodstains, human remains, a fridge containing a human head. One officer would later say, "It was like walking into hell." Dahmer confessed in chilling detail. No emotion, no remorse, just a man explaining how he ate parts of his victims to feel close to them. The trial was a media sensation, but Dahmer didn't fight the charges. He pled guilty but insane. He was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal disorder, and a psychotic disorder. Still, the jury found him sane enough to be responsible. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, totaling 957 years in prison. But justice didn't wait long. On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer was beaten to death by another inmate at Columbia Correctional Institution. Some said it was vengeance. Others called it fate. Either way, the monster was gone, but the scars he left remain. His story forced America to confront terrifying truths. That killers don't always hide in shadows, that the most dangerous people can live in plain sight, and that evil can sometimes be boring, soft-spoken, even polite. Dahmer wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was awkward, quiet, emotionally distant. But that's what makes him unforgettable. There was no thrilling chase, no grand manifesto, just slow, methodical horror, unfolding behind closed doors for years. His crimes weren't just about murder. They were about erasure of identity, of humanity, of any trace of the person that once was. He stripped his victims of names, stories, and dignity. And that's what makes Jeffrey Dahmer one of the most dangerous men in history. Not because he wanted to kill, but because he wanted to own death itself. And for a horrifying moment in time, he did. Number 3, Pablo Escobar, the king of cocaine. Number 3, Pablo Escobar. He wasn't a serial killer in the traditional sense. But if you measure danger by blood spilled, cities corrupted, and governments shaken, then Escobar wasn't just dangerous. He was a war machine with a human face. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria rose from the slums of Medellin, Colombia, to become the most powerful drug lord the world has ever known. At the height of his empire, Escobar controlled 80% of the global cocaine trade. He made so much money, nearly $420 million a week. That rats ate $2 billion a year in stored cash, and it didn't matter. But his power wasn't just built on drugs. It was built on fear. Escobar killed anyone who stood in his way. Judges, journalists, politicians, police. He bombed airplanes, assassinated presidential candidates, ordered mass killings in broad daylight. The streets of Medellin ran red. Entire neighborhoods lived in silence, terrified that one wrong word could mean death. His motto was clear: plata o plomo, silver or lead. Take the bribe or take a bullet. And thousands chose silence to stay alive. Escobar styled himself as a Robin Hood figure. He built houses, clinics, and soccer fields for the poor. He donated food and paid rent for struggling families. In return, the people protected him. To many, he wasn't a criminal. He was a savior. But make no mistake, behind the philanthropy was a brutal, cold-blooded kingpin. Escobar's rise sparked one of the deadliest conflicts in Latin American history. In the late 1980s and early 90s, Colombia was plunged into chaos. Car bombs exploded in Bogota. Entire police departments were on his payroll or under his gun. When the government agreed to extradite drug traffickers to the U.S., Escobar declared all-out war. Hundreds were murdered in retaliation. And still, he thrived. In 1991, facing pressure from the U.S., the Colombian government struck a controversial deal. Escobar would surrender, but only if he could build his own prison. It was called La Catedral, but it wasn't a prison. It had a nightclub, a jacuzzi, a soccer field, and Escobar continued to run his empire from inside its walls. When the government finally moved to transfer him, he escaped with ease. And so began the final manhunt. The Colombian government, aided by U.S. Special Forces and a vigilante group called Los Peeps, launched an all-out campaign to destroy him. In the end, the man who once ruled over billions, who ordered bombings with a phone call, was found hiding in a rundown Medellin rooftop apartment. On December 2nd, 1993, Escobar was shot dead, either by police or, as some believe, by his own hand. The empire fell, but his influence never truly died. Escobar left behind a blueprint, one followed by cartels from Mexico to the Philippines. A lesson in how power, money, fear, and loyalty can turn a man into a myth. Even today, people visit his grave. They take selfies at his mansion ruins. They sell shirts with his face on it. But what's often forgotten is the cost. Over 4,000 deaths linked directly to Escobar. Bombings that killed innocent civilians. Entire generations in Colombia scarred by his reign. He didn't just traffic drugs. He trafficked terror. And what made him so dangerous was that he didn't just build an empire. He built a kingdom of fear, protected by the very people he oppressed. You couldn't kill him with truth. You couldn't shame him with law. For a time, the world bent around Pablo Escobar. And that's why he sits at number 3, a billionaire outlaw who held a country hostage and smiled while doing it. Number 2, Ed Gein, the madman who inspired horror. Number 2, Ed Gein. He didn't have the body count of Ted Bundy. He didn't build an empire like Pablo Escobar. But what Ed Gein did, what investigators found on his property, was so disturbing, it changed American horror forever. He was a real-life inspiration behind Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. Why? Because Ed Gein didn't just kill. He collected. He wore the skin. And he turned death into decoration. Born in 1906 in Plainfield, Wisconsin, Ed Gein lived a life of isolation and twisted devotion. He was raised by Augusta, a fanatically religious mother, who preached that women were the root of all evil. She controlled everything, his thoughts, his beliefs, his fears. When she died, Ed broke. The house froze in time. He closed off the rooms she once used, leaving them untouched. And in the parts of the house he did use, he created something far more horrific, In 1957, police began investigating the disappearance of local hardware store owner Bernice Wardens. The last receipt in her store had Ed Gein's name on it. They went to his farmhouse. What they found inside would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Bernice Warden's body was in a shed, beheaded, gutted like a deer, hanging upside down. But that was only the beginning. Inside the house, they discovered bowls made from human skulls, chairs upholstered with human skin, a box of preserved noses, lips used as a pull cord for a window shade, a belt made of human nipples, and most disturbingly, a full woman's suit, stitched together from the skin of various corpses. Ed Gein admitted to exhuming at least 9 graves from local cemeteries. He said he would dig them up, take what he needed, and put the rest back. He wasn't robbing graves for jewelry. He was collecting bodies, but not out of hatred. He claimed he wanted to create a suit so he could become his mother. He missed her. He wanted to be close to her. And in his broken mind, wearing human skin was the way to do that. Experts would later classify him as criminally insane. He wasn't calculating or charismatic like Bundy. He was socially awkward, quiet, and appeared almost harmless. But behind his silence was a deep madness, one nurtured by isolation and the warped beliefs of a twisted upbringing. He confessed to murdering 2 women, Bernice Wardens and tavern owner Mary Hogan. But it's what he didn't kill that truly horrified the world. The desecration of corpses, the trophies made from human flesh, the merging of death with daily life, furniture, utensils, clothing. Investigators said it felt like walking into a nightmare. And yet, Gein was calm. He didn't understand the outrage. To him, this wasn't evil. It was ritual. It was love. After his arrest, Ed Gein was declared insane and committed to a mental institution. He would remain there for the rest of his life, diagnosed with schizophrenia and psychosis. He died in 1984, but his legacy didn't die with him. His crimes gave birth to modern horror. Movies, books, television, all borrowed from the macabre museum Gein created in rural Wisconsin. But we must never mistake influence for importance. Ed Gein wasn't famous because he was clever. He wasn't a mastermind. He was famous because he forced us to confront the limits of human depravity. He blurred the line between life and death, between grief and madness, and he showed us that danger doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits quietly on a lonely farm, sewing together the faces of the dead. That's why Ed Gein ranks as one of the most dangerous men in the world, not for the number of lives he took, but for what he did with them, for how he turned human remains into household objects and death into a second skin. Ed Gein didn't just kill, he unraveled humanity itself. Number 1, H.H. Holmes, America's first serial killer. Number 1, H.H. Holmes. To the public, he was a charming doctor, well-dressed, polite, educated. But beneath the surface, he was a sadist, a swindler, a sociopath. And what he built in 1890 Chicago would come to be known as the world's first murder hotel. His real name was Herman Webster Mudgett, but he went by Holmes. And under that name, he constructed a building so horrifying, it reads like fiction, 3 stories tall, a maze of hallways and staircases that led nowhere, soundproof rooms with gas lines to suffocate victims silently, hidden chutes to drop bodies into the basement, a kiln, yes, a literal furnace, to cremate the remains, and a surgical table where Holmes could dissect his victims before selling their skeletons to medical schools. All of this was real. This was not legend. It was planned. Holmes built what became known as the murder castle. He designed every trap, every secret passage, every death room with a purpose. And what's worse, he built it in plain sight, right in the middle of Chicago during the 1893 World's Fair, when over 27 million people flooded the city. Tourists checked in. Most never checked out. Young women looking for jobs, travelers seeking cheap lodging, even business associates. Holmes lured them all with promises of opportunity, then vanished them. When police finally investigated, they discovered bones in the basement, blood-stained walls, stacks of human remains. He confessed to 27 murders, But the true number could be much higher. Some estimates put the body count over 200. No one knows for sure. He covered his tracks well. He kept trophies, forged identities, and burned what was left. But Holmes wasn't just a killer. He was a con man, one of the most ruthless in American history. He forged documents, faked deaths, ran scams across the country. He even killed a business partner and tried to collect life insurance on his partner's children. In fact, that's how he was finally caught. Not for the hotel, not for the missing women, but for murdering the children of a man he'd lured into a deadly business deal. When authorities tracked him to Boston in 1894, they uncovered the horrifying truth. The murder castle was searched, and investigators were overwhelmed by the layout. Entire floors seemed built to confuse. Some doors opened to brick walls. Others led to steep drops or secret compartments. Holmes had engineered a slaughterhouse for humans, and no one had noticed until it was too late. In 1896, Holmes was hanged. Before he died, he gave contradictory confessions. Sometimes he claimed to have killed dozens. Other times, he denied everything. His final words were chilling. "I was born with the devil in me." And maybe he was, because Holmes wasn't driven by passion. He didn't kill in rage. He killed out of curiosity, out of greed, out of a cold, clinical interest in what he could get away with. He turned murder into business, and he used intelligence, charisma, and trust to do it. That's what makes H.H. Holmes so dangerous. He didn't wear a mask. He wore a smile. He didn't need to chase his victims. They came to him. He built an empire of death brick by brick, then profited from it. There are killers with more victims. There are criminals with more money. But Holmes represents something far more terrifying. The intersection of intellect, manipulation, and evil. A man who murdered without remorse, who treated human lives like inventory, and who turned the idea of home into a trap. His hotel is gone now, burned and demolished, but the story lives on. In books, in nightmares, in the very blueprint of every haunted house ever imagined. Because Holmes didn't just kill people, he designed death. And that is why H.H. Holmes stands at number one. The most dangerous man in the world. Not just for what he did, but for how many never saw it coming. And there you have it, the most dangerous men in the world. From the sinister mind of H.H. Holmes to the horrifying reign of Pablo Escobar, these men prove that evil wears many faces. But their stories don't end here. The darkness they left behind still haunts us. If you found this video chilling, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell to get notified when we release more spine-tingling true crime content. Share this video with anyone who thinks they've seen it all, because trust me, there's always more lurking beneath the surface. And as always, leave a comment below. Who do you think should have been on this list? Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and never forget, the most dangerous people aren't always the ones you expect.